Finance Assistance to Ukraine Bill Committee.
Now.
Order.
Thank you.
Order.
Finance Assistance to Ukraine Bill.
Debate will take place on the question that Clause 1 stand part, together with the question that Clause 2 stand part, and that the new clause has been selected. I remind members again that in committee, members should not address the Chair as Deputy Speaker. Please use our names when addressing the Chair. Madam Chair, Chair or Madam Chairman are also acceptable. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. Madam Chair, we had a very constructive second reading debate on this finance assistance to Ukraine bill. In particular, I would like to express my appreciation for the universal support the House has shown towards the provision of this vital funding. It is clearly a subject close to the hearts of many of us across the House. I look forward to further discussion on this important bill today. As the House is aware, the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration is an ambitious scheme designed to provide Ukraine with a total of $50 billion in additional support, to be repaid by the extraordinary profits generated on Russian sovereign assets held in the European Union. The United Kingdom's contribution of £2.26 billion is joined by pledges from the United States, the European Union, Canada and Japan. Madam Chair, this bill contains only two clauses. They are both straightforward. Clause 1 grants the government the legal spending authority to fulfil the commitment we have made to provide Ukraine with the UK's contribution to the ERA. The clause empowers the Treasury or the Secretary of State to provide the government of Ukraine with funds approved by Parliament as a result of the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Loans for Ukraine scheme or any subsequent arrangements that are supplemental to or modify or replace those arrangements. Payments made under this Clause 1 will be those which are necessary to perform the UK's commitment to the ERA scheme. I think the Honourable Gentleman wanted to intervene. I give way.
Julian Lewis.
In welcoming the government's measures, of course, I note that he did refer to the extraordinary interest from the frozen Russian assets. Has the government permanently set its mind against any possible actual seizure of the assets themselves, perhaps in agreement with other G7 or EU members?
I thank my right honourable friend for his contribution. As we debated at second reading, it's a commitment across G7 partners and with the European Union to take action on the proceeds of the assets that are held, but that for other complicated legal reasons at this stage there is no intention to seize those assets at this time. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Stephen Gethins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the Minister for this and acknowledge his acknowledgement that there is cross-party support. But to back up my colleague, the £3 billion from the UK is generous and will make a difference, but the £300 billion in frozen assets will be utterly game-changing. Now, I accept his argument at the moment about some of the more complicated legal issues. I know he accepts the very serious situation and the situation the Ukrainians are facing on the front, defending all of us. So can I encourage him merely to continue to look at this issue and see if he can work with G7 colleagues to find a way of unpicking some of the difficulties that he's highlighted?
I welcome the honourable gentleman's encouragement, which I take in good faith. He will know that these matters are multilateral and subject to negotiation with other allies and G7 colleagues, but he will also know, as I'm sure the whole House does, that we go into 2025 with a strength of resolve across those G7 countries to do all that we can to help Ukraine continue to mount its defence against the illegal invasion from Russia. Any other payments, Madam Chair, beyond the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Loans to Ukraine or any other country which are unrelated to the ERA scheme are not covered by the provisions of this bill. This money is in addition to other grants and payments that have been referred to in the House previously. The clause contains provision for the UK to provide funding towards subsequent arrangements which are supplemental to, modify or replace the ERA. This provision allows for flexibility in the unlikely event that the scheme itself should significantly alter. It is not intended to be used without this change in circumstances. Clause 2, Madam Chair, simply sets out the short title of the bill.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. And I thank the Chief Secretary for opening this debate. The Conservative government was a vociferous advocate for mobilising Russia's frozen sovereign assets to support Ukraine. We drove G7 and European partners to try and coalesce around the most ambitious solution possible to achieve that outcome. And the announcement on the 22nd of October marked progress on that journey and is a step in the right direction. We understand that the government's position is that United Kingdom's contribution should be earmarked for supporting Ukraine's military expenditure, including on air defence, artillery and other equipment. And on these benches we would support that. We need to persevere with our efforts to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position to counter Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion. Matters since second reading have been fast moving, and if I may, I would like to pose some questions to the Chief Secretary as we debate this Stand Part clause. First of all, Madam Chair, the United States, since the second reading, has given $20 billion to Ukraine, funded by the profits of frozen Russian assets. This economic support forms a significant part of the overall $50 billion package agreed by G7 member nations announced in June. Now, the US Treasury said that it had transferred the $20 billion to a World Bank fund where it will be available for Ukraine to draw from. Money handled by the World Bank cannot be used for military purposes. Now, the US administration had initially hoped to dedicate half of the money to military aid, but this would have required approval from Congress, which the President did not seek. So perhaps the Minister can update the House about what discussions the UK government has had with the US administration, Canada and the European Union about the use of funds provided for military purposes. Are there any strings attached to the funds that will be provided by the UK? And as the US has already provided its share of monies anticipated under the G7 package, can the Minister advise the House on the timing of the UK's contribution? I think that was made clear at second reading. It would just be helpful to have an update given this move by the US since we last met. Now, as the Minister advised and as the Government has previously advised, the loans that the UK will pay will form part of the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Loan Agreement by the G7. The loans the UK will provide will be repaid via the Ukraine Loan Cooperation Mechanism, which was established by the European Union under Regulation 2024/2773 on October the 24th. The ability for the UK to have its loans repaid is, in large part, dependent upon a decision by the European Union to maintain its freeze on Russian assets. The EU renews Russian sanctions every 6 months, and efforts to extend this to a 3-year review cycle were rebuffed by Hungary earlier this year. So will the Minister confirm that there is a risk in the event that the EU does not extend its sanctions on Russia, that the costs of the loan will be borne by UK taxpayers, and what mitigations he may consider if that situation arises? And finally, Madam Chairman, if I may, some issue on the use of assets. The EU controls more than 2/3 of Russia's 300 billion of sovereign assets that have been frozen by Western allies following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 90% of these EU-held frozen assets are held by the Belgium-based financial services company Euroclear. The profits from the EU-held assets, estimated between 2.6 and 3.2 billion per year, have been used to arm Ukraine and finance its post-war reconstruction. We understand that the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, said in an interview with The Guardian on the 12th of December that the European Union should use the billions in frozen state assets to aid Ukraine. She emphasized that Ukraine had a legitimate claim for compensation and described the Russian assets held in the EU as a tool to pressure Russia. Now, the Minister has already responded to honourable members earlier, but can he confirm what the UK's government's position on this? Has he discussed it with the EU and Belgium, and does he have any plans for the UK to go further on the use of these assets?
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to speak to new clause 1, which I've signed. But first of all, I want to just reiterate my support for the government and for this bill, which I made at second reading. Is absolutely right and proper that that Russia pays for the damage it's done to Ukraine and its people. And I think this is an important first step in providing that financial assistance from Russian assets to Ukraine. And echoing the comments around the Chamber, we need to move towards a position with allies of seizure of Russian assets. But this is a good first step, positive first step, that we're using the proceeds, the interest of those assets to support Ukraine. In the second reading, I mentioned that Canada has passed the Special Economic Measures Russia Regulation, which collects data on Russian assets, freezes them and publishes the value, which in Canada currently stands at 135 billion Canadian dollars. I asked if the government could disclose our assets, or Russian assets held in the UK rather, in the same way. New Clause 1 goes a long way to providing this. It will, first of all, ask the government to lay a copy of a report before Parliament showing monies provided by the UK to Ukraine under this Act, or bill as it is now an Act, as it hopefully will be, what the United Kingdom's share of the principal loan amount, interest accrued under the scheme is, that level of financial disclosure, and finally, receipts of extraordinary profits from Russian immobilised sovereign assets under the scheme. So it would, to an extent, mirror what our close ally in Canada has done. And although I don't expect we will see us dividing on this new Clause 1, I'd really appreciate the Minister commenting about how he's going to report progress to the House, disclose the level of Russian state assets that are here, and how much of those how much of the interest accrued from those assets has been mobilised to support Ukraine in its war efforts. Thank you.
MacCleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the honourable member for Leeds Central and Headingley. He's just outlined some of the things that are in the amendment that we've put forward for this bill. I just wanted to outline in some detail what is in that amendment and what we're hoping to achieve with it, and hopefully the Minister will be able to respond and outline some of his thoughts around reporting in particular. The amendment itself would impose a reporting requirement on the Secretary of State to keep Parliament informed about 3 critical aspects of our support to Ukraine under this scheme. The reports would detail the monetary support provided to Ukraine, including the amounts dispersed and how this fits into the broader multilateral agreement. This ensures transparency and allows members and the public to understand the precise scale of our financial commitment. The reports would also provide clarity regarding our share of the principal loan amount and any interest accrued. Such information is vital for popular scrutiny and public trust, ensuring that funds allocated are achieving their intended purpose. Finally, and most importantly, these reports would shed light on any extraordinary profits arising from immobilised Russian sovereign assets under the scheme. While we cannot legislate here to seize those assets directly, this provision ensures that the question does not simply fade away. By requiring regular reports that we maintain focus on the issue and keep pressure on the government to engage with our G7 partners. If at some future point there is an opportunity to use Russian state assets more directly for Ukraine's recovery, Parliament will be fully informed and ready to act. These reports must highlight any discussions the UK government has had with other G7 countries about future steps, including expanding the range of assets considered or using them in new ways. This ensures ongoing diplomatic transparency and accountability. Parliament will know if the government is pushing for more ambitious measures internationally or if it is hesitating while others lead. In practice, the first report would appear within 6 months of the bill's passage, with subsequent reports every 6 months until 1 year after the relevant international arrangements cease to operate. This structured timeline guarantees sustained oversight rather than just a one-off glance. Given the complexity and duration of the challenges Ukraine faces, such ongoing engagement is critical. It sets a framework for continued scrutiny, encourages more ambitious future action, and underscores that, despite the bill's limited scope, our resolve to hold Russia accountable remains unwavering. Through these measures, we ensure that Parliament remains fully informed and ready to stand by our Ukrainian allies when the opportunity to take bolder steps arises.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for my lateness. It's a pleasure to rise in support of this bill. Madam Chair, the battle for Ukraine is one of the defining issues of our age. In February 2022, Putin launched an illegal and reckless invasion of a sovereign European democracy. To see this happen in the third decade of the 21st century was a sobering moment. Nothing like it we'd seen before in European soil since World War II. It also put beyond any doubt the revanchist and irredentist ambitions of the Russian regime and the need for all freedom-loving and democratic peoples to resist those ambitions at all costs. The Ukrainian people are fighting not just for Ukraine, but for all of us, the values we hold dear: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and the freedom from global gangsters like Putin. By helping Ukraine to stand strong against Russian aggression, we're sending a clear message to dictators and autocrats around the world that we will not tolerate violations of national sovereignty and the use of force to change borders. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and last week in my constituency I met with Ukrainian refugees who conveyed both their sense of gratitude for our country's steadfast support for their war action against Russia, but also a sense of desperation because many of their visas run out early next year, and I wonder if my honourable friend agrees with me that the government should act quickly to give certainty to them that they will continue to remain welcome in the UK for the foreseeable future.
I agree with my honourable friend on that point on visas. We need to do everything that we can to support the Ukrainian people, whether it's here in the UK or it is abroad. Our support for Ukraine is an investment not just in their future, but the security and stability of Europe and the world. Madam Chair, Russia's war against Ukraine has not only devastated the lives of millions, but it's also challenged the varied foundations of international and rules-based global order. The brutality of Russia's actions, the targeting of civilians, and the displacement of over 8 million Ukrainians are stark reminders of the atrocities that war brings to ordinary people. And this is a tragedy too for the Russian people. Many tens of thousands of Russian troops have been killed needlessly in Ukraine, victims of the vainglorious and deranged ambitions of their leader. Our quarrel is not with ordinary Russians. It is with the regime that represses them and lies to them. Ukraine, meanwhile, has shown resilience, courage and unwavering determination to protect its land, its people and its freedom. President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people have stood firm in the face of adversity, and I have said before, they're fighting not just for Ukraine, but fighting for all of us. And let's be honest, if we do not send the weapons and financial support the Ukrainians need to fight this war, then make no mistake, one day we will have to send our sons and daughters to confront Putin and his regime. I'm proud to say that our unwavering support for Ukraine is something that unites all sides of the House, and it's united our country too. I'm very proud to walk around Livingston constituency and see Ukrainian flags in the windows and gardens as a sign of our solidarity. From providing military aid to offering humanitarian assistance, from imposing sanctions on Russia to offering refuge to those fleeing war, we have acted with purpose and with resolve, and many British people, including individuals in this House, have opened their doors to the Ukrainian refugees. The UK has provided £457 million in humanitarian assistance since the start of this full-scale invasion. £20 million to double this year's support to Ukrainian energy, and £40 million for the stabilisation and early recovery, which the Foreign Secretary announced in Kyiv in September. And this Labour government has indeed stepped up for Ukraine. The UK will deliver £3 billion in military aid to Ukraine every year for as long as it is needed. Their fight is our fight. The UK's military, financial, diplomatic and political support for Ukraine is ironclad. This bill provides the government with spending authority to enable the UK to provide Ukrainians with financial assistance as part of the G7 ERA loans to Ukraine scheme. It is an important part of this effort. It represents an advance of approximately $50 billion repaid from the extraordinary profits made on immobilised Russian sovereign assets held in the UK. Madam Chair, we must continue to stand with Ukraine, to confront Russian aggression and to pursue Putin for his war crimes. Our response must be one of strength, resilience and unity for as long as it takes.
Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At a time of existential threat to Ukraine, I've been heartened by the tone that we've seen across this House towards its people. But it is critical at this moment in history that this House and all European governments step up and don't give up. And whilst I welcome the details within this short bill, I do have concerns that we should be focusing upon the untapped countermeasure and offensive that is available at our disposal. And I would gently say to the Minister, as raised by a number of colleagues in this House, that we should think about the use of Russian frozen assets to support Ukraine in its non-violent economic and political reconstruction. Because, of course, the UN General Assembly has already endorsed an international mechanism for compensating Ukraine. But we can't wait to a point where the war is over before we enact that countermeasure. Back in 2022, Ukraine lost 29% of its GDP, and therefore leaving it until the end of the war will be far too late for Ukraine to receive its compensation. Instead, by using the $300 billion in Russian central bank assets held by free and open countries now, we can give Ukraine a lifeline as it continues in its honourable defence of its country. And I believe that this action is not just morally justified, but it also has sound legal grounds underpinning it. The true centre of gravity in this war is Ukraine's economic endurance against Russian strategy of attrition and ruin. But there is currently, despite the efforts across Europe, a leadership vacuum in pushing through the use of Russian frozen assets in order to help the decisive action that is needed for Ukraine's victory. And what we are seeing is Putin's increasing isolation with civil unrest in Russia, and it is imperative and paramount that we take advantage of it. To date, European countries and the United States have provided roughly $3 billion per month to the Ukrainian people in order to keep its government functioning. And I think we would all across the House endorse that approach. But in the long term, it's neither right nor practical to expect Western taxpayers to foot the bill for reconstructing Ukraine when there are legal means for Russia to pay. Because there can be no credible scenario whereby Russia gets its money back after waging an unprompted war against Ukraine whilst the victims go uncompensated. After all, that would effectively put the position of an aggressor's rights taking precedence over the rights of the victims. And so what we must do is show that the UN rulings and the international law have teeth, and there are consequences to Russia for its waging its illegal war. We can't blindly live in the hope that Russia will fulfil their legal obligations. And so I gently say to the Minister that by taking action now and using those Russian frozen assets as a form of down payment on the reparations that Russia will one day have to pay should be a route that should be pursued by the government at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak in support of the bill and to pay tribute to the government's support of Ukraine and to the consensus around the House to support them against the barbaric and illegal invasion, as one from Livingston, of a sovereign nation. And when I look and see the invasion in February of 2022 of a European state by another, it's not something that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. It's something that I think we all thought would be consigned to the history books where it belongs. I'm very pleased that we're backing the Ukrainian people in their struggle, and I hope that the Russian people in time can vote in free, fair and democratic elections to choose their own path. But I would also like to pay tribute very briefly to the community of Northumberland who've come together to welcome families from Ukraine in Hexham, in Riding Mill and in other towns and villages across my constituency. And I'm always struck when I'm out and about in my constituency that I see Ukrainian flags in sometimes some of the most incongruous places that you wouldn't expect to, on country lanes, on the sides of churches and in private homes, and it really does give a renewed optimism when you see those flying over the beautiful Northumbrian sky. And I think one question that I've had put to me by constituents that I'd just like to gently probe the Minister on is the future of the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Something that many families who've taken in Ukrainian refugees have asked me to pursue clarity on. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could give some assurance on that or some timetable for that. But ultimately, this short bill is a necessary bill that is needed to promote and to protect one of our sovereign democratic allies, to protect our institutions, and as my honourable friend said, to prevent the need for further conflict in the years to come, as the war machine of Putin could quite easily continue to impinge on the lives of us and the rest of Europe.
Gethins.
Chair. Madam Chair, I'd like to endorse the comments that have been made by colleagues, and I think a little bit of perspective is due sometimes. In my constituency and in Tayside and Fife, and the member for Kirkcaldy will be well aware of this, we have defensive barriers that were built during the Second World War. Those barriers in Tayside and Fife were built by Polish and what is now Ukrainian soldiers who were standing up to tyranny. And they built those defences around Scotland to defend Scotland and also to defend the rest of the United Kingdom as well. Because they knew that to stand up for tyranny, there's no point doing so in one corner of Europe. You have to do it throughout Europe as well. And those defences are there, and they stand testament to the time when the Poles and the Ukrainians stood by us. And now is our time to once again stand by them. And I'd like to echo the remarks that have been made across this House by the member from Livingston, and actually the way that Ukrainians have come to our home and to our homes, and they have enriched our societies and enriched our communities. And I know they're keen to go home, but if we can just give them that little bit of certainty. I also want to pay tribute to my honourable colleague, the member for Tunbridge Wells, for his and the work of others in terms of those frozen assets, because I think that speaks to the enormity of the challenge that Ukraine's facing, and therefore the rest of us are facing at exactly the same time. And I acknowledge the work of the Minister in seeking to untangle those. But some of the administrative burdens, and I welcome his remarks, I really do welcome his remarks, are as of nothing compared to the burdens that are being carried by Ukrainian troops on the front line in Kursk, in Donbass and elsewhere as well, and nothing compared to the challenge that we will see in terms of a refugee crisis, in terms of conflict, should that front collapse at any point. And I know he gets that, and I know that there's agreement across this chamber on that, but I think it underlines. And can I also welcome the remarks that were made by the Conservative Shadow Minister in terms of engaging with our European partners on this, because this is pivotal. And I acknowledge his remark about where a number of these funds are being kept, and the need that if one moves, all need to move as well, and I fully endorse that. There is unanimity in this House, and I've been struck by the outstanding work that's been done by a number of colleagues here, but I think the unanimity in this House and the resolve reflects the magnitude of the challenge that each and every one of us face if we don't stand up to tyranny and if we don't secure the future of Europe right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Phil Brickell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly welcome this bill, which allows us to provide, alongside G7 partners, £38.6 billion of loans to Ukraine to be repaid using profits from sanctioned Russian assets. And I wholly support this government's commitment to stand unequivocally with Ukraine. But I do believe that Putin and his cronies should be the ones who pay for the damage that they have caused across Ukraine. And to that end, while this is a very welcome first step, may I ask the Minister if he agrees with me that we should be doing all we can within the rule of law to seize frozen Russian assets, both private and state, and use them to finance the defence of reconstruction of Ukraine. Moreover, may I gently suggest to the Minister that we must secure a swift resolution to the proceeds of the sale of Chelsea Football Club. Indeed, in March 2022, Roman Abramovich pledged to sell Chelsea Football Club and donate the £2.5 billion, nearly 7 times the value of humanitarian assistance the UK has pledged since the invasion in 2022 to support victims of the war in Ukraine. However, as I think all members of this House know, 2 years on, the sale has hit a stalemate and no money has regrettably been delivered to the victims of the conflict. And with that in mind, there are a number of recommendations the government, in my opinion, should commit to, which Campaign Group Redress has worked on, all of which I support. Number one, taking steps to ensure that the proceeds of the sale of Chelsea Football Club are swiftly transferred to a charitable foundation in the UK, or adopting other existing mechanisms set up to deliver reparations to victims of the conflict. Secondly, ensuring that a substantial percentage of the funds are used to fund reparation to victims of the conflict, particularly those victims of gross violations of international human rights law and of serious violations of international humanitarian law, particularly including survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Thirdly, engaging Ukrainian civil society and victims and survivors in guiding the repurposing of those funds. And fourth and finally, establishing a working group between the government, civil society and survivors to ensure that funds are distributed in an effective and timely manner. To conclude, Madam Chair, I very much welcome the substantial progress this government has made in the last few months in standing shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people, including, of course, the recent announcement of a new anti-corruption champion, the further designation of vessels in the Russian shadow fleet, and, of course, increasing collaboration across government to tackle Putin's war economy and bearing down on both the Kremlin but also the wider network of cronies who enable his unlawful and persistent invasion of Ukraine. As the Honourable Member for Leeds Central and Headingley has said, this is an important step, and I welcome further initiatives to support the Ukrainian people as they continue their struggle to protect their sovereignty and territorial integrity in the face of Putin's unlawful invasion.
David Taylor.
Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to follow on from the member of Bolton West, and I think he's just demonstrated why he's going to be such a valuable addition to the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I congratulate his election to it. I associate myself with his comments and the comments that other members have made in this House. Often we find ourselves disagreeing over the smallest of details, and it's very proud that we can all come together on an issue of such magnitude in unity with the people of Ukraine. Long may that cross-party support continued. Earlier this year, as some members of this House may know, I had the privilege of visiting Ukraine myself. I went over with an Estonian charity, driving over a couple of military pickup trucks from the UK as part of a much larger convoy that went into Kyiv, and those vehicles were handed over to the Ukrainian soldiers. And it really did bring home that there is not only support in this country and solidarity in this country for Ukraine, but solidarity across the whole of Europe, and that is why we are coming together with the measures in this bill. Even hopefully we'll have an opportunity to go again, and associate myself with the comments that the Honourable Member for Leeds Central and Headingley made earlier. We were both on a call earlier. I know that he and other members of this House have also made trips to Ukraine and also been part of aid convoys to help people on. Long may that continue. This bill is another tool in the arsenal when it comes to fighting one of the world's greatest tyrants. Of course, Ukraine's fight against Russian Tyranny is a fight not just for Ukrainians' sovereignty, but as I've just said, for the freedom and security of the whole of Europe. One of the very things that's very striking when you do that journey is you realise just how flat Europe is. And I know that seems like a silly point, but it really does bring home that there is nothing really stopping Putin at the borders of Ukraine if we don't stand up against him now. And the fact that another of the world's tyrants, Assad, is now cowering Moscow demonstrates the importance of curtailing Russia's aggression. I am proud that this government and the government before stands full square with Ukraine. As other honourable members have said, this bill will land a deafening blow to Putin's war machine and unlock in the UK's contribution £2.6 billion worth of be a 2.26 billion contribution to the ERA, which crucially will not be paid by Ukraine nor from British taxpayers, but from dodgy cash from profits owned by sanctioned Russian assets held in the EU. Madam, Chair, I associate myself with the comments of the honourable member for Livingston in listing the various ways in which the previous government and our current government is supporting Ukraine, and long may that continue. It's so important that we continue to stand foursquare with Ukraine for as long as it takes. I urge the House to do all in our power to ensure that this receives royal assent as urgently as feasible, especially as we approach winter, where the battle conditions are going to become even tougher. And finally, I would just like to use this as an opportunity to pay tribute to the Ukrainian forces fighting on the front line, British troops involved in training and equipping them, and to all of those showing resilience in the face of Putin's illegal war.
Minister Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In closing, may I thank Right Honourable and Honourable members for their contributions to the debate today. My honourable friend for Leeds Central and Headingley, members for Livingston, Kirkcaldy, Solihull West and Shirley, Hexham, Arbroath, Bolton West, Hemel, Hempstead, at the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and my honourable friend, the Minister from the Foreign Office, for being here for this important debate. All of us across the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, want the same thing: for Ukraine to win this war, and for the UK to provide the best possible support it can to make that happen as quickly as possible. I can assure the House that this will remain a priority for this government, and this bill is an important step towards that goal. Turning to the amendment, Madam Chair, we have one before the House today, tabled by the Honourable Member for Lewes. The government will not be supporting this amendment, but I will explain why. New Clause 1 would impose reporting requirements on the Secretary of State in relation to the ERA. As I see it, these would broadly fit into two categories. The first would require financial reporting to Parliament on the progress of the £2.26 billion ERA loan itself. This would include providing information on the disbursements made by the UK, our share comparatively to the G7, and providing details of the repayments we will receive from the EU's Ukraine Loan Cooperation Mechanism. The second category would involve producing a written summary for Parliament of discussions between the UK and our G7 allies regarding any subsequent schemes. This reference to subsequent arrangements tracks to the language in Clause 1b of the bill. Clause 1b provides the government with the flexibility to provide funds to Ukraine via alternative arrangements that are supplemental to or modify or replace ERA, for example, where necessary to respond to unforeseen future events or material changes in circumstances beyond our control. I will approach each of these categories in turn. First, in terms of the additional financial reporting requirements, subsection 2 of the amendment, these are unnecessary because the information required to be reported under that subsection will be reported in any case through Treasury's existing channels. The first tranche of the loan will be disbursed from the Treasury in the financial year to 31st of March 2025. The spend will therefore be reflected accordingly in the Department's detailed annual report and accounts for this financial year, alongside disclosure of any narrative associated with the spend. The annual report and accounts will be laid in Parliament before they are made public, and this usually happens in mid-July. Any future spending and repayments in future years will then be reflected in the annual report and accounts in the normal way. The Treasury plans to make the ERA support package separately identifiable in the notes to these accounts, which will allow the financial impact of the scheme itself to be readily understandable. This will be included alongside full disclosure of the risks, for example, credit risks and market risk, associated with the ERA spending. I will now turn to subsection 3, which would require the publication of a summary of discussions between the government and other G7 lenders on subsequent arrangements. As the House might expect me to say, the government should not tie its hands by agreeing to provide a public report on the nature of private discussions between G7 lenders. This threatens to undermine the UK's credibility with our established partners and allies in what I hope is an obvious point. Privacy allows our international partners to speak candidly to us and vice versa, which is key to our diplomatic efforts. I'm sure the House will understand that this is especially important for matters of global security, such as the debate before us today. When discussions are made and milestones reached, the G7 issue statements and communiques in the normal way. We do not want to undermine that process with mandatory additional reporting to Parliament. The government is committed to transparency and accountability, however, and Parliament will be updated in the usual way when major decisions are taken. This includes through oral and written ministerial statements, as the Chancellor did when the UK's contribution to the ERA was announced in October. But this does not extend so far as to provide a running commentary. This would ultimately serve to undermine our ability to resolve sensitive matters, including those relating to Russian assets, with our closest allies. I would, however, like to thank the Honourable Member for tabling this amendment, and I hope my answers are satisfactory in explaining the Government's position. Before I close, Madam Chair, I'll turn to some of the other points made by Right Honourable and Honourable Members in the debate. Madam Chair, the Shadow Chief Secretary asked me a number of questions. The first, of course, is that G7 allies will coordinate our approach to the scheme in the round, including repayments and mechanisms for the future. But as he noted, different countries are using the contributions in different ways, and as we've reported to the House, our intention is to use this money for military aid to Ukraine. The terms of the loan and how the loan will be executed is currently being discussed between our government and the Ukrainian government. And will be managed in the normal way as part of our portfolio of loans and the management of that loan portfolio. In terms of timing, as I've said, we intend to get the money to Ukraine as quickly as possible next year, which is why we're progressing for royal assent as quickly as possible for this enabling bill. The terms of the ERA, though, say that all money should be paid at the latest by the end of 2027, although we intend to be quicker than that. A number of members raised the correct point that under international law, Russia is liable for the damage it has caused in Ukraine and must pay for that damage. A number of honourable members asked me about asset seizures. I've given the House the government's position on that, but I can reassure the House that whilst this bill is not about seizure of assets, of course the government and our allies continue to keep all available opportunities under review so that we can pursue lawful avenues to ensure that Russia does pay for the damage it has caused. My honourable friends for Kirkcaldy and Hexham raised the Homes for Ukraine scheme and the question of visas. I can assure them that I will pass these points to my colleagues in the Home Office for them to consider and to respond to you in due course. Madam Chair, on a number of other issues, I think members rightly pointed out the support that this country has for the people of Ukraine, for the Ukrainian armed forces, and our allies in supporting them. And I thought it was timely going into this period of Christmas, when we have many images of England on our Christmas cards and on our TVs, to note the number of Ukrainian flags on houses, churches, community buildings across the United Kingdom. I think it shows a gesture of solidarity between the British people and the Ukrainian people, shows that we are keeping them in our hearts this Christmas time, but also keeping them in our minds as we think about our resolve going into 2025 to do all that we can to help them through these atrocious situations on the border with Russia. I give way to them.
To the Minister, amongst some of the excellent contributions we heard in this debate was the remark by the Honourable Member for Livingston about the fact that if Putin isn't seen to fail in Ukraine, it will ultimately end up with British troops being involved in some sort of conflict directly. Will he take that message back to his Treasury colleagues? Because some of us feel that these arguments about whether 2.5% of GDP should be spent now or in a couple of years' time rather miss the point, because if we get to the stage that British forces are engaged, we will be spending far more than that. And as a Treasury Minister, he should realise that investment in defence in peacetime can deter a much more expensive conflict.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. The government's position, as he will know, is that we will set out the trajectory to 2.5% of GDP on NATO qualifying spend in 2025, following the conclusion of the Strategic Defence Review and the Spending Review. He will also know that we fund our armed forces, not just to be prepared, but to be ready to contribute. But clearly I can't comment on hypothetical scenarios in 2025. I think he was also right to allude to contributions from honourable members in this debate, though, that rightly highlight that Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield are not just fighting for their own country, they're fighting for the security of Europe and the United Kingdom. And I think all of us are very clear-eyed about that, and therefore our responsibility to help them. And that's why this bill is one part of the package of support that we are putting in place, and that we will continue to put in place over 2025. Madam Deputy Chair, I think I've answered most of the points substantively, and so I'll conclude my remarks for committee stage.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The question is that I do report the bill to the House. The question is that I do report the bill to the House. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and directed me to report the same without amendment.
Under the order of the 20th of November, we shall now move to the third reading of the bill.
Now.
Minister to move third reading. Minister Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a third time. I would like to again extend my gratitude to members from across the House who have contributed to today's debate and for facilitating the swift passage of this bill. The House has today and throughout the bill's passage so far made clear its strong feelings towards the plight of the Ukrainian people. Members of all political stripes have spoken eloquently in favour of continued support for Ukraine in their ongoing fight against Russia's tyrannical, unprovoked and illegal aggression. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the UK government, no matter which party has been in office, has remained committed to fully supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. The G7 Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Scheme and this bill, which facilitates the UK's contribution, is another demonstration of the UK delivering on this promise. Beyond the ERA, the UK has now committed £12.8 billion in military, humanitarian and economic support to Ukraine. Earlier this year, the government announced that we would continue to provide guaranteed military support of £3 billion per year to Ukraine for as long as it takes. And our ERA commitment goes further still. As honourable members know, the bill unlocks the UK's contribution of £2.26 billion, which constitutes a fair and proportionate contribution to the scheme based on our GDP share within the G7 and EU. It remains crucial that we pass this bill as swiftly as possible to enable us to begin dispersing funds this winter to meet Ukraine's urgent needs. Taken together, the ERA will provide Ukraine with an additional $50 billion in support. I would like to pay tribute to our G7 partners for their collective determination to bring the ERA to fruition in just a few short months. We will remain united in our support for Ukraine against Russian provocation. We in this House recognise the sacrifice that the people of Ukraine are making. They are fighting not only for their own survival and their own national identity, but also for the security of Europe and the United Kingdom. This bill enables the government to provide Ukraine with the essential support it requires to continue its battle against Putin's unjust and illegal aggression. And may I therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, at this point, given this is probably my last contribution to the House this year, wish you and the House a very Merry Christmas and say to the Ukrainian people that we hold all of them in our hearts over this difficult period. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Shadow Minister Richard Fuller.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the official opposition, can I thank the government for bringing forward this bill and concluding its stages in this House before we break for Christmas. Can I also thank the Chief Secretary to the Treasury for the way that he has handled the discussions on this bill at each stage, providing every member with all the information they need at any stage in answer to all questions. He has done an exemplary job. And also to note the uniformity of supports across this House from members, whichever party they represent. But it goes deeper than that. Since former Prime Minister Boris Johnson galvanised the West to the defence of Ukraine through Prime Minister Liz Truss, through my right honourable friend, the member for Richmond and North Allerton, and now with our current Prime Minister, the right honourable member for Holborn and St Pancras. The United Kingdom government has been determined in support of the people of Ukraine. Madam Deputy Speaker, it says something for the depth of support for the people of Ukraine in this country that you could sweep away a large proportion of the members of this House and replace them with representatives from across the country who are different, and yet the resolve and support for Ukraine remains the same. But we should not give up our efforts, because since we started our debates, there have been further actions in Ukraine. And I would like, if I may, just to quote a latest summary from the Institute of War, demonstrating the urgent need for the support that we're passing today. The Institute says that on December the 14th, Russian forces fielded more than 100 pieces of equipment in a recent assault on the Seversk direction, and noted that there were 55 combat engagements in this direction on December the 13th, a significant increase in tempo in this area of the front line. And it went on to say that the GUR reported that a contingent consisting of Russian and North Korean servicemen in the Kursk Oblast lost 200 personnel as of December 14th, and that Ukrainian drones swarmed a North Korean position, which is consistent with recent reports of North Korean forces engaging in attritional infantry assaults. Our support, the military support the United Kingdom will provide on this measure, is desperately needed. But the need goes further. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an estimated 8 million Ukrainian citizens have been displaced and 6 million people left the country as refugees, with many still unable to return. As honourable members have said, over 200,000 Ukrainian citizens are living in the UK, and our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families. And we should also note the work of British charities and non-government organisations, including the British Red Cross, who estimate that together with other Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world, assistance has been provided to over 18 million people in Ukraine. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we take our break, many of us will be celebrating Christmas. And may I say that I hope the Christian message of peace and hope will receive resonance in the new year, and that all of us in Western Europe, and particularly in Ukraine, can look forward to a peaceful future.
I call Liberal Democrat spokesperson James MacCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in support of the measures in this bill and to highlight the importance of our unwavering commitment to Ukraine, and to start by thanking the Chief Secretary for the Treasury for his detailed response to the points raised in my amendment, which I really appreciate. When I addressed this House a few weeks ago, I expressed my desire for measures that would go further, particularly to empower the government to seize Russian state assets frozen in the UK and use them to help rebuild Ukraine, an issue that many other members have touched on during the Committee of the Whole House. This remains, in my view, and that of the Liberal Democrats, a critical step that must be taken. While procedural constraints have made such an amendment impossible within the scope of this bill, the importance of ensuring accountability and justice cannot be overstated. The repurposing of frozen Russian assets is not just a financial issue. It is about ensuring those who have enabled the Kremlin's actions face tangible consequences. The UK has an opportunity to lead by example in demonstrating that aggression will not go unpunished. This bill, by enabling the UK to participate in the G7's Economic Resilience Assistant Loans Programme, provides vital financial support to Ukraine at a critical time in its fight for freedom. Beyond financial measures, we must continue to stand resolutely with our Ukrainian allies in other ways. This includes providing advanced military aid, bolstering Ukraine's defences, and working closely with NATO and the EU to coordinate our collective response to Russian aggression. The UK must lead by example, showing that our commitment to Ukraine is unshakable, even in the face of uncertainty about the future of US support. Ukraine's fight is not just for its own sovereignty, but for the principles of freedom and democracy that we all hold dear. With winter looming and the conflict showing no signs of abating, the UK must be a steadfast partner, ensuring that Ukraine has the resources, support and international backing it needs to endure and prevail. This bill is a welcome step forward, but it cannot be the final word. Let us seize the moment to demonstrate moral leadership and resolve. Let us ensure that Ukraine's struggle for freedom remains our shared cause, paving the way for future peace and resilience.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.